A small town in Georgia, where life flowed in a measured and predictable manner, often seemed cozy and comfortable for the locals. Here, neither successes nor failures could be hidden. Gossip spread with lightning speed, and yet, behind the outer calmness, hid personal dramas that preferred not to be made public. In this vicious circle lived Jordan Carter and Trevor Brooks, two successful black men who had been friends for years. Jordan was a well-known lawyer in the city. He was entrusted with the most delicate cases related to divorce, family disputes, and property conflicts. His confidence and charm attracted clients, and charisma made him irresistible in the eyes of women. He was used to being the center of attention, used to the fact that people, especially ladies, often lingered on him their eyes. But behind this external picture of a successful and self-sufficient man hid something more, a hidden longing, which he himself tried not to notice. Trevor, in turn, ran a construction company, which was engaged in the reconstruction of old houses. Being a down-to-earth and reliable man, he did not seek fame and always considered himself a working man, despite the success of the business. Deep down, he was proud of his accomplishments but didn't like to flaunt it. His life seemed right and clear to him. A good home, a successful career, a beautiful wife. It seemed, what more could one want? Trevor's wife, Ashley, was the epitome of feminine attractiveness. Tall and slender, with skin the color of dark chocolate and brown eyes that glowed with warmth. She was an example of sophistication and grace. Everyone knew her as a caring and devoted wife, supporting her husband in all his endeavors. But behind these outward attributes was a woman who felt lost. She often wondered if her life was passing her by. Lately, the thought that she was missing something more and more often crossed her mind, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Trevor loved her in his own way, but their marriage had become something of a chore. Over time, they stopped sharing their innermost thoughts and dreams, and their conversations were mostly about domestic issues or work. Ashley noticed that Trevor was spending more and more time at work, explaining it with big projects, and less time paying attention to her. Sometimes, she caught herself thinking that even when they were together, they were each in their own separate worlds, and no one noticed it. Trevor's 40th birthday party was being held at their house. Most of the guests gathered in the backyard, where there were tables set with treats and a bonfire blazing in the center. The guests enjoyed music, dancing, and drinking. Trevor was the center of attention as always, telling jokes and laughing, surrounded by friends and colleagues. Ashley, for her part, watched her husband with a smile, but inside she felt a cold sense of loneliness. At one point, Jordan, who was also at the party, noticed her detached look and decided to approach. "Ashley, you look especially beautiful tonight," he said as he approached her with a glass of wine. She turned around, her face lit up with a smile, but there was something elusive in her eyes, a mixture of joy and sadness. "Thank you, Jordan. You look great too," she replied, trying to hide her inner turmoil. Their gazes crossed, and there was a subtle tension between them that they both sensed, but neither dared to acknowledge. Their conversation began on superficial topics. They discussed the latest news, exchanged pleasantries. But Jordan noticed that her smile wasn't genuine, and her laughter sounded too strained. After a while, he decided to ask, "Are you okay? You look a little tired." Ashley sighed and averted her eyes. "Just work, home, worries," she said, smiling. "You know how it is." Jordan, catching the note of doubt in her voice, looked at her more closely. He realized there was more underneath her outward calm than she was letting on. Her gaze often drifted to Trevor, who was laughing with his friends, and it was obvious that she felt like a stranger among all these people. As the party drew to a close, Jordan walked out into the parking lot and saw Ashley standing by her car, rummaging through her purse for her keys. "Ashley, is everything okay? Can I help you?" He approached her, coming closer. "Oh, it's just me," she grinned. "I can't find my keys, as usual. I must have left them at Trevor's." "Do you want me to give you a ride?" Jordan offered. "Trevor's already left, so we can leave your car here for the night." Ashley hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, smiling gratefully. The drive home was longer than it seemed, and the conversation took on a life of its own. Jordan was a good listener, and Ashley, feeling at ease, began to share her thoughts on life and marriage. She said that sometimes she feels like an observer, like she's looking at her life from the outside. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just stuck," she confessed, not expecting herself to be so candid. "Life passes me by, and I'm just watching." Jordan felt a strange thrill. He hadn't thought of her as someone to have a relationship with, but now, in this moment, he saw a woman who lacked warmth and understanding. "I'm sorry to hear that, Ashley," he said, not taking his eyes off the road. "You don't deserve to feel this way. Maybe you just need more time to yourself." She looked up at him, a spark flashing in her eyes. Their gazes met, and the moment seemed to last longer than usual. Jordan felt his hand automatically reach for her shoulder, but he came to his senses in time. "You're right. I just have to make a change," Ashley murmured, not taking her eyes off him. They drove to her house, and as they got out of the car, Ashley suddenly realized that Jordan wasn't just looking at her as a friend. There was something more in his gaze, something she herself had once longed to see in Trevor's eyes. When she closed the door, Jordan sat in the car for a moment, as if replaying what had happened in his head. He knew something had changed between them, but he couldn't explain what it was. Ashley tried to control herself and not let her thoughts return to the night Jordan had given her a ride home. But her mind kept returning to his words, to the look in his eyes where she saw more than friendly concern. Lately, they had begun to cross paths more often, as if fate itself was pushing them toward each other. Sometimes it was chance encounters at the cafe where they both liked to grab coffee in the morning. Sometimes it was at town events attended by the same people. When Jordan happened to see Ashley at a local coffee shop, he couldn't resist and walked over to her. She was sitting at a table by the window, looking pensively out at the street and seemingly oblivious to anyone around her. When she saw him, she was confused for a moment, but then her face lit up with a welcoming smile. "Jordan, what a coincidence," she said, inviting him to sit down. "Coincidence or fate?" he replied jokingly, taking a seat across from her. "How are you?" "I'm fine. Work, home, the usual. And you?" They started talking about everyday things, sharing news, but gradually the conversation turned more personal. Ashley felt like she could talk to him about everything, like someone who understood her. She shared what she couldn't tell Trevor, feeling the urge to open up to him more and more. After that meeting, Jordan invited Ashley to dinner, not at a local restaurant where they might attract attention, but at a small place outside of town. He suggested they meet there in the late afternoon, when there was less chance of running into someone they knew. Ashley hesitated at first, but her inner restlessness and overwhelming attraction took over. The evening was quiet and peaceful. They sat at a table on the terrace, lit by the dim light of the street lamps, and talked about life, business, and the things that made them both feel empty. Jordan felt truly open for the first time in a long time. He told Ashley about his youthful dreams that never materialized, and how work and success hadn't made him any happier. "You know, Jordan," Ashley said as they finished their wine, "sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Like everything that happens doesn't belong to me. My marriage, our plans. It's like it belongs to someone else." Jordan stared at her intently, sensing that Ashley's words reflected his own thoughts as well. He leaned closer and, taking her hand in his, spoke softly. "You don't need to feel this way. You deserve to be happy. Maybe you just need to let yourself be yourself." Ashley looked at his hand touching her palm. That touch felt so natural and yet forbidden. She pulled away, feeling the anxiety building inside her. "We shouldn't, Jordan," she said, hiding her eyes. "It's not right." "I know," he replied, taking his hand away. "But sometimes, Ashley, right and wrong are just words." After that night, they saw each other more and more often. They were spontaneous meetings in cafes, restaurants, and even on walks in the park, full of light flirting that gradually grew into something more. Jordan knew he was being reckless, but he couldn't stop himself. Ashley had become something of a lifeline in his life, keeping him from drowning in routine and emptiness. One night, as they sat in Jordan's car after dinner, he leaned in and kissed her again. Ashley wanted to push him away, but her own feelings were stronger. They both realized they were making a mistake, but it seemed like the only right thing to do at that moment. After that first kiss, their romance began to grow rapidly. Now they met not only in cafes and restaurants, but also in motel rooms rented for a few hours, where they could afford not to hide their feelings. Each time they agreed to be discreet and hide their meetings at all costs. But the guilt and fear of exposure grew every day. Ashley became more and more distant from her husband. She tried to be attentive and caring, but inside, she felt torn apart. Trevor did not notice the changes in his wife's behavior, or at least tried not to notice them. He was immersed in the company's business, but he was coming home later than usual, which allowed Ashley to hide his late-night absences. One day, when Trevor returned earlier than usual, he noticed that Ashley looked strangely agitated. Her hair was damp, as if she had just gotten out of the shower, and her eyes were glowing with an expression he hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you okay?" he asked, hugging her. "Yeah, just tired," she replied, slipping out of his embrace and hurrying upstairs. Her heart was racing, not from seeing her husband, but from the fear that Trevor suspected something. Despite her desire to end the relationship, Ashley was sinking deeper into the maelstrom of passion with Jordan every day. We discussed that evidence should emerge gradually during the investigation, rather than uncovering it all at once. I apologize for earlier errors. Let's rewrite Chapter 3 with the above guidelines in mind, and an emphasis on conflict and escalating tension. The relationship between Jordan and Ashley was becoming a chaotic maelstrom from which there was no escape. Jordan felt more and more dependent on these encounters, on her smile and touch. His feelings were becoming more and more obsessive. Ashley, on the other hand, realized that the bond had gone too far and knew she had to find a way out before it was too late. But her attempts to distance herself only added to the pressure. In recent weeks, she'd avoided seeing Jordan more and more, explaining it away with family matters, girlfriends, or fatigue. Every time he tried to talk her into coming, she found excuses, and it made him angry and jealous. Jordan couldn't stand the thought of Ashley spending time with Trevor again, that she could go back to her old life as if nothing had happened. He knew her marriage was fractured, but now everything was pointing to the fact that she was determined to repair it. One night, when Jordan once again tried to talk her into seeing him, Ashley refused. Her voice sounded cold and detached, as if she'd already made up her mind. "We shouldn't see each other anymore," she said, trying to speak firmly. "I have to end this." Jordan froze. Her words sounded like a sentence. "You can't just walk away." His voice shook with restrained anger. "You promised me we'd be together." "I said that in desperation, Jordan," she replied, trying to keep her composure. "I was confused, but now I realize it was a mistake. I love my husband, and I want to make it right." Those words hurt Jordan more than he could have expected. He felt control of the situation slipping away. Taking his phone in his hand, he looked at the messages they'd exchanged over the past few months, rereading the lines full of passion and promise. Had it all really been a lie? Ashley tried to end the conversation, but Jordan insisted on seeing her, saying he needed to see her for at least a few minutes to explain himself. She reluctantly agreed, but warned that she didn't have much time. They met at Jordan's apartment, where they usually held their secret meetings. Ashley entered the room and immediately felt the tension. Jordan stood at the window, his face grim, his gaze cold. "Is this how it ends?" he said, not taking his eyes off her face. "I came here to explain," she began, trying to find the right words. "This whole thing was a mistake?" Jordan interrupted her, turning sharply toward her. "Just like that?" Ashley didn't know what to say. She'd hoped the meeting would help set the record straight, but things weren't going the way she'd planned. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Jordan didn't try to hide his anger, and Ashley felt anxiety overwhelm her. When they spoke again, the words began to turn to shouting. Jordan accused her of deceiving him, using him to distract herself from her problems, and now she was just going to go back to her husband as if nothing had happened. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "I want to save my family." Jordan stepped closer and looked her straight in the eye. "So you chose him? You always chose him?" he whispered, anger mixed with desperation in his voice. Ashley took a step back, feeling the situation spinning out of control. "We really shouldn't see each other anymore," she said. "I'm leaving." But before she could take a step toward the door, Jordan grabbed her arm, his face contorted with pain and anger. "You're not just going to leave," he said, holding her back. "You can't just take everything we had and erase it." Ashley tried to break free, but Jordan's hands gripped her too tightly. She felt panic rising in her chest, and her heart hammered harder. "Let me go!" she screamed, her voice full of desperation. Jordan seemed to lose touch with reality. He realized that she was telling the truth, that their bond had been doomed from the beginning. But the realization was driving him to the brink. He couldn't accept that she was gone, that she could walk away as if none of it meant anything. In a fit of desperation, he opened Ashley's purse, pulled out the pills she carried with her, and with frantic calmness added them to the water he poured into her glass. "You need to calm down," he said, holding out the glass. "Please, Ashley, drink it." Ashley tried to refuse, but Jordan insisted. She took a few sips, but almost immediately felt dizzy. Everything around her began to seem blurry. Her eyelids felt heavy. Losing consciousness, she collapsed onto the couch. Jordan froze in confusion. At that moment, the realization came to him that now he had truly backed himself into a corner. He had to act quickly. He picked her up, carried her out to the car, and drove her to the house where Trevor and Ashley lived. He laid her in the filled bathtub, then opened the water to hide the traces of the pills. Before leaving, he tried to clean up the mess so he wouldn't leave any traces. When he left the house, he didn't know that his actions would be far from perfect. When Trevor returned home the next morning, his heart clenched with a strange feeling. He noticed that the bathroom door was ajar, and from behind the doorway came the sound of water pouring. A strange premonition took hold of him, and he quickly went to the door to see what was going on. Ashley was lying in the filled tub, her body motionless and her skin pale. The water was over the edge, creating puddles on the floor. For a moment, Trevor thought this was all some kind of nightmare that he was about to wake up from, but the horrifying reality quickly took over. He rushed to Ashley, pulling her out of the water and trying to bring her to her senses, but to no avail. Her body was cold, and the life in it had long since faded away. Trevor called an ambulance, but the paramedics only pronounced her dead. The police arrived shortly after them, and the house was filled with noise and voices echoing off the walls. Law enforcement officers busied themselves with examining the scene while Trevor sat on the couch, unable to believe what had happened. He answered questions mechanically, as if he were in a trance. Detective Nicole Harper scrutinized the bathroom. She had the feeling that something was wrong. On the surface, it looked like an accidental drowning. The door had not been forced, and there were no signs of a struggle. However, one thing kept bothering her. The water in the bathtub kept running. Who had left it on? Was it an accident? Her partner Marcus James asked, looking into the bathroom. "Maybe," she replied, not taking her eyes off the filled tub. "But not everything here makes sense." When the results of the initial examination arrived, it turned out that Ashley's system contained traces of a powerful sedative. Nicole was alarmed. The dosage was so high that it couldn't have been overlooked. The drug that had been found was clearly not meant to be taken on a regular basis, especially in such a concentration. Detectives immediately decided to see if Ashley's doctor had prescribed the drug. While the investigation was just beginning, Nicole and Marcus began their interviews. They knew they had to be extremely careful and thorough in cases like this. Nicole insisted on talking to Trevor in person, despite his condition. When he agreed to meet with the detectives, his face expressed exhaustion and grief. "Can you recall anything unusual about your wife's behavior in recent days?" Nicole asked, making notes in her notebook. "She seemed tired," Trevor said, his voice hoarse. "I noticed that she'd been taking some pills. Sedatives, I think." "Sedatives?" Nicole asked, raising her eyebrows. "How long had she been taking them?" "I don't know exactly. I found a bottle in her purse a couple weeks ago, but she said it was prescribed by a doctor for stress." Trevor answered, thinking. Nicole watched him carefully, her face impassive, but the first doubts were beginning to form in her mind. She knew that many victims did take medication before they died, but in this case, the high concentration was alarming. The detectives decided to examine Ashley's medical records to find out if she was really under a doctor's care. While interviewing Ashley's friends and girlfriends, Nicole noticed an interesting detail. One of her friends, Kelly, mentioned Ashley's habit of avoiding bathing on certain days of the month. "It was kind of weird," Kelly admitted. "She'd always said she didn't like to take a bath on those days because of the discomfort." Nicole made a note of the remark. Ashley's habit seemed like a random detail, but it still raised questions. If Ashley really avoided baths on certain days, why was she found specifically in the bathtub? Was it her decision or someone else's idea? As detectives investigated Ashley's surroundings, some interesting details began to surface. Jordan Carter, a prominent attorney and close family friend, seemed odd to Nicole. When questioned, he remained calm, but his answers were too streamlined, as if he was hiding something. "Did you socialize with Ashley a lot?" Nicole asked, trying to catch him off guard. "Yeah, we met occasionally for work," Jordan replied, avoiding a direct look. "Did you know her well?" Nicole continued. "Yes, of course I did. She was my best friend's wife," he said, but there was no warmth in his voice. After that conversation, Nicole felt the need to check him out more thoroughly. So far, Jordan wasn't a prime suspect, but his behavior made her wonder. Investigators decided to check surveillance footage that might have captured the movements of people outside Ashley and Trevor's house the night of her death. Finding a slight discrepancy between Jordan's testimony and the time he claimed to have been home, Nicole and Marcus decided to go back to him with more specific questions. Jordan, however, was ready. He knew the detectives would be looking for inconsistencies and tried to be as careful as possible in his testimony. But his nervousness didn't escape Nicole's eyes, and she sensed that their meeting was just the beginning. Now the case had become personal to the detectives. They saw that an apparently accidental death could hide unsolved mysteries. As time passed and evidence piled up, the case of Ashley's death grew increasingly suspicious and speculative. Detectives Nicole Harper and Marcus James focused on everyone who was close to her, exploring every possible motive. At first glance, the death appeared to be an accident, but the more they dug, the clearer the signs of a carefully concealed criminal scheme became apparent. The results of the additional medical examination revealed an important detail. The concentration of sedatives in Ashley's system was several times higher than the safe dose. It could no longer be explained by accidental ingestion or overdose. Everything pointed to external intervention. Nicole realized that someone might have been trying to sedate Ashley before her death, but had clearly crossed a dangerous line. The questions continued to multiply. Conducting thorough interviews with her friends and co-workers, Nicole and Marcus heard some interesting admissions. In the week before her death, Ashley had spoken several times about needing to complete something important. No one around her knew exactly what she meant, but her friend Kelly recalled Ashley saying that it's time to stop kidding herself. Those words, which in themselves seemed insignificant, made Nicole wonder about the hidden aspects of Ashley's life. Soon they received another valuable find: surveillance footage from the surveillance cameras located in the neighborhood of her house. Nicole was scrutinizing the footage when she suddenly noticed that a few hours before the estimated time of Ashley's death, a car similar to Jordan Carter's had passed near her house. "What do you think?" Marcus asked, looking over her shoulder as the license plate flashed on the screen. "It matches his alibi, but if he was here, why would he hide it?" Nicole frowned, noting to herself the need to question Jordan again. "I want him to answer a few more questions." Jordan's recall to the station didn't go as smoothly as the first interrogation. When Nicole began to clarify exactly where he had been the night of Ashley's death, Jordan seemed noticeably more tense. His answers sounded too polished, as if he'd rehearsed every word beforehand. The detectives noted that he avoided talking about the last days of Ashley's life, persistently turning the subject to more general matters. "So you're saying you didn't see Ashley the day before she died?" Nicole clarified, keeping her eyes on him. "Yes, that's right," Jordan replied, pressing his lips together. "But then why was your car in the neighborhood of her house that night?" Nicole continued, opening the printout of the surveillance tape in front of him. Jordan's face darkened, and he held his breath for a moment. "It's just a coincidence. I was in the neighborhood, but I didn't stop by her place." His answer was rambling, and Nicole picked up on that thread immediately. After the interrogation, Nicole sensed that Jordan was hiding something. She suggested going back to the physical evidence found at Ashley's house. The vial of pills they found in the victim's bag was of particular interest. so they decided to re-examine it for fingerprints. The results of the analysis surprised even experienced investigators. Jordan's fingerprints were found on the vial with pills. This discovery was a significant step in the case. Nicole realized that if Jordan had really given Ashley the pills, it meant he had access to her personal belongings, and possibly a motive he increasingly seemed more than just a casual acquaintance, but a man who could influence her life. Detectives decided to take a closer look at the connection between Jordan and Ashley. When interviewing witnesses, they learned that they often met in places that at first glance had nothing to do with their daily lives. Ashley's neighbor had once seen the two of them together at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, which raised questions for her, but she hadn't given it much thought. In addition, further examination of the medical examination revealed another detail. There were no obvious signs of struggle on Ashley's body, but there were light bruises in the area of her wrists, which, according to experts, could have been caused by a strong grip. This added new urgency to the theory that someone could have forced her to take the drugs. Now the detectives were faced with the task of putting all the pieces of the puzzle together into one picture. Jordan remained under observation, but that kept Nicole on her toes. She realized that they needed more evidence to credibly accuse him of being involved in Ashley's death. Nicole and Marcus delved deeper into the investigation, gathering data about Jordan's past and his connection to Ashley. The more they learned, the harder it became to deny that the two had more than a friendly relationship. Meetings, texts, phone calls, all pointed to a close bond that could hardly have been casual. Looking through the correspondence, Nicole noticed several messages sent the week before Ashley's death. In them, Jordan persistently invited her to meet, but she, on the contrary, tried to evade, finding various excuses. The messages showed that Ashley was clearly stressed and was trying to limit their communication. Nicole wondered if the reason for this was an attempt to break off the affair. As the detectives checked the electronic records, they also looked at Jordan's alibi. His claims that he was at home the night of Ashley's death came into question after detectives found a witness who saw his car near her house closer to the alleged time of death. That witness, a local gas station attendant, recalled a car that looked like Jordan's was parked at the curb, and the driver looked nervous. Marcus immediately offered to review the surveillance footage from the gas station. The video clearly showed Jordan getting out of the car and going into the store to buy a bottle of water. His demeanor was tense, causing investigators to question his version of events. Meanwhile, Nicole headed to meet with Ashley's doctor to confirm details about her prescribed treatment. Dr. Reiner, who had been treating her for the past 6 months, met the detective in his office filled with medical reference books and medications. "Are you saying you've been prescribing Ashley stress medication?" Nicole asked, scrutinizing the expression on the doctor's face. "Yes, it was a common sedative in low doses," he replied, frowning. "But what you're describing is much stronger than I recommended." "So you didn't prescribe such a high dose?" Nicole clarified. "No, not at all. It could have been dangerous, especially for someone who didn't have serious sleep problems. I would never prescribe such a thing without a proper examination." These words confirmed that the drugs could have been used by someone else. Nicole immediately realized that Jordan may have slipped the drugs to Ashley intentionally to put her to sleep and make it easier to fake the accident. Investigators were now tasked with verifying Jordan's every move that night. They began analyzing surveillance footage from the area around Ashley's home in greater detail, examining footprints at the scene to find any additional evidence of his presence. Forensic experts were examining the fabric of Ashley's clothing to determine if there were any marks indicating that she had been moved while already unconscious. When Nicole met with Trevor again, she knew that the conversation would not be an easy one. He was clearly exhausted from the past few weeks, his eyes darkened from sleep deprivation, and his face was gaunt. "We've discovered new facts," Nicole began. "We suspect that Ashley's death was not accidental." Trevor nodded slowly, his lips pressed together. "We know that she had a close relationship with Jordan," she added, "perhaps more than just friendly." Trevor froze, his gaze dropping to the floor. He looked like he was trying to make sense of what he'd heard. "Did they have a conflict?" Nicole asked, trying to catch his reaction. "I don't know. But one time," he was silent, gathering his thoughts. One time I noticed that Ashley was nervous after talking to him. It was about a month before she died. She said she was sick of Jordan, that he was too pushy. Those words reinforced the detective's suspicions that Jordan might not just have been a secret lover, but the man who threatened Ashley when she tried to end the relationship. Nicole and Marcus went back to analyzing all the data to find a connection between the events. They checked some more evidence, including prints found on a vial of pills and phone records. The results showed that Jordan had called Ashley several times the night before her death, despite his claims that they hadn't communicated. Detectives began to suspect that these particular calls may have been related to Jordan's attempts to talk her into a final meeting. Nicole and Marcus continued to gather more and more evidence linking Jordan to Ashley's tragic death. Now that the medical examiner's office had confirmed that Ashley had been unconscious before she was submerged in the water, the situation became even clearer. Her drowning had been staged. It no longer seemed like an accident, and it became obvious to detectives that Jordan had played a key role in the crime. Phone records and call history gave detectives new food for thought. The night before her death, Jordan called Ashley several times, despite his claims that they hadn't been in touch. The calls became an important piece of evidence because they indicated that he was trying to contact her. Possibly to arrange a meeting, Nicole felt it was time for them to press Jordan and get him to talk. When he was called in for questioning for the third time, he was much more wary. It seemed that every little detail of the detective's questions made him nervous. Nicole felt that a little more, and he would start to get confused in his testimony. "You claim you didn't talk to Ashley the day she died," she began, keeping her eyes on his face. "But the phone records show that you tried to call her several times that night. Why?" Jordan froze for a moment, then with a visible effort, pulled himself together and answered, "It was important. I tried to convince her to meet and talk." "Why?" Nicole asked, her voice still calm but tense. "She wanted to end it," Jordan said, his voice shaking. "I knew it was a mistake. We could have worked it out." The detectives watched his reaction carefully as they began to present the evidence they had found. Nicole had uncovered the whole picture, pills with his fingerprints on them, evidence of their frequent meetings, and inconsistencies in his alibi. Jordan could feel his nervousness building. "Did you sedate her to make her sleep?" Nicole asked, deciding to press his most vulnerable point. Jordan sighed heavily. His gaze slid across the table in front of him, as if he were trying to find something that would help him get out of the situation. Then, after a long pause, he began to speak. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I just put her on the medicine to calm her down," he said. "We were fighting. She wanted to leave, but I knew it could be fixed if I just gave her time. I wanted her to rest so we could talk about it when she woke up." Nicole, not giving the appearance that those words surprised her, continued, "But when she passed out, you took her home and put her in the bathtub. Why?" "I didn't know what to do." Jordan clenched his fists, his voice trailing off. "I didn't want anyone to think I killed her on purpose. It was an accident. I just didn't know how else to explain it." Those words were the final point in the investigation. Nicole and Marcus exchanged glances. Everything was coming together. Jordan had been full of fear and despair when he'd staged the drowning, hoping to cover up his guilt. But his actions were too hasty, and his attempts to make it look like an accident were clumsy. As Jordan was led away, Nicole returned to her desk and stared out the window. She thought about how passion and obsession could lead to irreparable consequences. Ashley had been victimized not only by chance, but by a love that had become too obsessive and destructive. "Sometimes things are so messed up that you don't even know when they went wrong," Marcus said as he approached Nicole. "Yes," she answered quietly. "But we know one thing. If someone thinks they can control another person, it always ends badly." The story ended not just as an accident case, but as a tragedy about love that turned into obsession and ruined lives.